Hey, all right. So we are back with another look at this book by Cedric Robinson, The Terms of Order. Going to talk about chapter one today. If you're catching this on Facebook, if you could just click a like on there, that would be great. If there's anything in here that comes up that you have a question, comment, snide remark about, leave it in the comments there. If you are if you're on YouTube, it'd be great if you subscribe to the channel there, like the video. Um, yeah, that would be good. I'm going to try to do one of these a week or every other week. It gets pretty dense in here, but I'll see what I can do. But anyway, this chapter one of the text is called "The Order of Politicality." I'm using this PDF to walk through the text here. It is, I think, a slightly different version than this republication that was done recently. It's about a page off um, from the book I just showed you. So, what can you do, right? But so the order of politicality, we talked a little bit last time about the book being this look at um, eventually it'll be a look at political leadership um, and the ways that people imagine that order in society, um, governing, comes through um, these political leaders, or that political leaders are somehow a way to judge the effectiveness of what's going on in the political world. Um, Robinson takes issue with that. um, he even in the subtitle of the book is political science and the myth of leadership. So he takes issue with that, but we'll get into that later. Um, and then he just takes issue in general with what he calls politics or the political. And in this chapter, the order of politicality, he's just going to break down basically the way that we think in our times of order in society as requiring the political, that for there to be some kind of recognizable order in the social world, that there has to be a political authority. In Robinson's understanding, or maybe just the plain reality, is what that means is basically a state, some kind of governing structure that's wielding basically coercive power over people. So you can think about um, there's kind of like a political class in the Western governments. There's a set of elites that kind of determine the parameters of what solutions might be to problems. Um, you know, there's a group of people. We just had midterm elections, so it should be kind of clear to everyone, you know, the range of solutions to problems and even the problems that get spoken about. And if you listen to this political class, in mainstream media or politicians talking, there's a way that they cannot see beyond um, this political system. They can't see beyond what they what they understand as possible solutions or what the limits are. And they actually believe that you know this whole um, political system has been set up in a very scientific and even exceptional way, and that if there is some kind of little problem, it just needs a little tweak here and there, and then it should get back to it should get back to functioning well for everyone. Um, there's a recent biography on Cedric Robinson by Josh Myers, um, that I'm forgetting the title of, but I wanted to read this little quote from the text where he talks about the time in which Robinson was writing this book, Terms of Order. He says, "Those trained in political science during this era were taught under the assumption that the American political tradition was the norm, and even that this liberal structure was superior and should become universal to the benefit of humanity. As a discipline, political science would and could not step outside of these assumptions. It was structurally impossible. Even as a discipline was born under the racist logics of white supremacy, this seeming contradiction was thought solvable within the tradition. If political science had racist antecedents, a truer science of politics, that supposed legacy of a distinctly American approach to problem solving, could chart the way to a pluralist democratic future." Again, a lot of words, but I think that we can see. I think we can see that with all of the issues, if you think about what happened, in 2020, people out on the street, people protesting, um, and all of that energy, all of the demands that came from the street, from those movements up, how they were kind of pared down into what was acceptable, by the political parties, and how the possibilities, the other ways of being, the other ways of seeing, were had to be um, had to be cut short so that the political could keep moving, and all of the dialogue was just about, you know more, maybe a few more voting rights, maybe a few more, um, you know slight reforms in the way that police do their job, and then everything will go back to the right again, pun intended, I suppose. uh, and Robinson talks about this. I think this kind of, he's talking about the political. He says it is an ordering principle distinguishing the lawful or authorized order of things, while itself being the origin of the regulation. We associate then the political with power, authority, order, law, the state, force, and violence. All of these are phenomena which restrict the outcome, deflect the extraneous, and limit the relevant forces. I think those three things become really important ways of thinking about what the political does, for the way that Robinson will continue to investigate this. So the political class, the political environment, the political authority of the state always restrict the outcome or the possible outcome, deflect anything that extraneous or outside of the um, the defined parameters, and limit the relevant forces. Um, yeah, just a pretty simple way to think about that. Then he says, in the political context, the end is altered from a purpose to an effect, and the vision of power as a process scaled down from the realization of the good to the production of a faithful mechanism of response. So these two ideas of the political, one being that it is a mirror of a certain segment of society, which is those who actually own the stuff and the people who are seeking to be close to them and make a living off of the political system that best meets their needs. What happens is that anything that's outside of that gets limited, gets and any forces that are pushing against that get pushed down. Um, and then what he's also saying is that there was a conception, or there is a conception out there, kind of what what authority might be, that we'll get to a little later. But this idea of ordering society, structuring things so that there might be some kind of realization of the common good. But in the political system, that gets, he says, scaled down, to the production of a faithful mechanism of response. So as long as there's something that kind of can be this tried and true response that people find passable, then you know we don't then we miss everything else gets restricted, deflected, or limited, basically. Um, yeah, so I think a really good example of this, since we already mentioned, you know, um, 2020 and the uprisings there, is just if you think about policing, um, it is, you know, the tried and true mechanical, faithful mechanical response to any kind of crisis, any kind of rising up of different forces, whether it's labor movements that get too too powerful, whether it's mass movements out in the street, whether it's just um, communities that we don't know what to do with as a society that we've decided are um, you know surplus, I guess. And policing becomes this the police become this mechanistic response, and it's so clear when you hear the language and the rhetoric that the the view to a common good, that would be common to all involved, um, is not the thing on the forefront. It's not that's not what the political is there for. Um, in the social realm, in in realms, even maybe in spiritual realms, in realms of kinship and family and extended family, we might find other ways to reduce harm, um, to to be to be together. Um, but this response is always just immediate and, in so many ways, unquestioned by um, a certain group of people, a certain class of people. And it is the one that we are propagandized about, that it is the best solution, the best and only solution, over and over again. So that, again, anything outside of that, and I can put some books in the we could put some books in the description below, that of all kinds of other people that have suggestions that have, for how else we might deal with organizing ourselves, for safety, or whatever, for a lack of a better word, that that doesn't require that immediate police presence response. So, but I think that's again what that's an example of kind of how the political works in our society. And I'll just find this quote here. One thing about this book is that Robinson, I don't know if you've ever read any Plato, that Socrates, kind of the dialogues, where it's just like this kind of like circling around and questioning till we get to kind of the you know the real meaning of a word, that a word is just questioned and interrogated. A concept is questioned and interrogated until you kind of see it from different sides and maybe get a a more radical understanding of it, a more to the root understanding of it. And so, one of the things that Robinson will do in this book is take a look at this idea of the political, and what he says here. He basically says that what's happening now is that we just label everything as political, uh, and we look to politics for solutions to everything, and it's in its way it has swallowed up um, other ways of being together, other ways of interacting, and it's come to the point where you, as he says here, and so one would be led finally to the conclusion that one cannot resolve the question of the nature of the political by the process of distilling it from the science of politics, saying that basically when you look for what what is politics, you basically just find that everything has been labeled labeled politics to the point where it almost doesn't have any meaning whatsoever. And he says, for at some point, one would have to confront the science of politics in its epistemological, metaphysical, and methodological terms. And so this is kind of a preview of what the book will do. The book will look at um, what are the theories of knowledge, of understanding, what is behind the way that political science or politicians or the political class um, discern what they think is um, a, a valid uh, a valid choice or a valid thing of our understanding or knowledge. And metaphysics is the things beyond physics. So what is their conception of time and space? The bigger questions of being, uh, and then how do they go about using all of these things? So sounds kind of crazy, but hopefully we can walk some of that. The rest of this chapter, let's see if I can find the. It doesn't really break it down, but the rest of this chapter, he wants to talk about um, the epistemology by looking at how the sciences, like the hard sciences, um, some different ideas about how they see change in scientific knowledge happen. And he wants to talk about um, political science as a paradigm. And so he looked at these two kind of theories of how scientific knowledge is determined by these two scientists. And I'll just kind of try to summarize it um, simply that one scientist is Popper, who has a very traditional kind of scientific method understanding of how science works. That there are these um, theories that are tested, and then we have these theories, and then we seek ways to test them again and see if there's any kind of anything to falsify, and we use our rationality to do this, and that we because we are rational animals, we can kind of come to some kind of uh, we can come to some kind of understanding together of what is, you know, kind of true and real in in the scientific world, and basically that science progresses by this application of our rationality and our testing and falsifying or verifying things. And then Thomas Kuhn has this idea of paradigms, where he suggests that um, basically the gist of it is that while he sees what Popper is saying as a piece of scientific understanding and knowledge, that there's also these values that we have that come into the picture, that make it so that we don't always bring in all of the possibilities that might be tested, that we kind of have blinders on about, you know, about different aspects of the world. I mean, you think about moving from a geocentric to a heliocentric way of understanding the cosmos. You know, there was just certain values and limits and religious understandings and societal views that made it hard to make that transition for people. And it didn't necessarily have anything to do with, um, you know, the science or the hard science. It had something to do with values. And so part of this is, so Kuhn is saying, is his consistent declaration is that he is attempting to describe the critical force of values in the choice of theory, explanation, meaning, and logic in science. Such regions constitute values to be used in making choices rather than rules of choices. Maybe to go on to what Robinson does with this is that he then talks about how we can look at this as through the lens of the way we think about democracy. So he has a section in the book called Democracy as a Paradigm. And the question he asks about that is, he asks, here, let me put, sorry, I keep to put it up. How is it that in the celebration of democracy as the institutionalization of just power that Western political science seems to have become, is there never the slightest suggestion of the absurdity of identifying this construct with the reality of mass societies as they exist in North America, Western Europe, and elsewhere? Now, I know this is going to be somewhat controversial for some people, maybe, but what he will go through, and I'm just going to try to say it as best I can, is that if we look at what is meant by democracy, what in its root meaning is, demos is the people, the masses, and the ocracy part is rule or authority. So the rule of the masses. Now, we also know that basically, all of the thinkers from Plato, Aristotle, and those who Aristotle on, especially, who were close to the ruling class in their societies, all kind of despised democracy and found ways to limit it in some way or another. And what Robinson will say is that, if you look at these the political states, the organizations of let's just use United States for an example. We claim to be an exceptional democracy. I mean, but again, from the beginning, there were a certain segment of the masses, if not a large segment of the masses, who were um, given no authority or decision making in the process. Um, there were, you know, over time, this has remained the case. It's still the case today. There's still constant effort to disenfranchise, and then the question of the franchise itself, and what the vote actually does now. You know, you look at all the money that was poured into these elections, and the result, as far as you know, what this will mean for everyday people, and how it will change um, their reality is minimal, and all the money has gone into into deciding these races that didn't decide anything, and the amount of money that was spent could have been actually just used to change and decide so many differences for the people. And we know that if the people actually had some kind of authority and control over how everything that was produced was distributed, again, that this would not be the system that we have, that this would not be the way this would not be the way things were set up. And there is a group of people that benefit from the way things are, and the way that the political system is organized to facilitate and to be utilitarian for their needs, to be to serve their needs. And you can see, I mean, if you have to spend that much money to get elected, that means that you need to be close and friendly with the people who have that much money to spend. Um, and that doesn't mean that everybody is, following exactly what these people say. But if you are too far, if you are too extraneous, if you represent forces too far outside of that, then you are not going to get promoted. You're not going to be put up. You're not going to be funded. You're not going to have an opportunity. So, I mean, the way that we do not question these things, um, the ways that we don't question the obvious ways that what we call an exceptional democracy, and what we, in so many ways, spend billions of dollars to export to other places, theoretically, through our military. Um, we don't question um, how this is just how poor of a way it is to organize our society, and the awful outcomes that come from that. And so out of that, he will ask us to think about how we how the political, how the paradigm, meaning that there's a set there's a set of parameters around how much we can think about what are solutions to problems, what are ways to go about living and being in the world and ordering ourselves as a society. um, and he'll basically talk about how, again, how the political, it distorts or cannibalizes is another way he talks about it, other ways of being in society. It rationalizes the existence of the modern government and state the way that it is, and its uses of power and coercive authority. Every problem only seems to have political solution, and the political operates to limit the range of possible resolutions or reconstructions. And he talks about in a section called Consciousness of Politicality as an Ideology. So he demonstrates that the limits of the political ideology by highlighting the way political scientists explain non-political societies, and even if they do ever admit that they exist. So Robinson will tease this in and come back to it later in the book, but you can get an idea of just this, the way that this ideology, this way of rationalizing political authority, the way politics are, as the only way, or or the best way, by looking at how people look at societies that might be non-political. And so what Robinson wants to do is try to bring to our consciousness that the fact that what the political class, what the media, what the politicians are telling us is the good and right order, the ideology of it, the way that they are limiting the possibilities, so that we might be able to recognize or even be conscious of other ways and other means of authority outside outside of the political. So let me just put on my my pastor's hat here for a second, in this, and or a person of faith, you know, understanding of the world. You know, when we think about, I think about this a lot in thinking about the way that the early Christian movement was organized and understood itself. It was the notion of authority actually, challenged the state and its particular way of governing. Not only the Roman Empire, but the religious and political system of the day, and had this, in the early days, this very loose way of understanding the authority, or the ordering and guiding of the Holy Spirit. This idea of this communal spirit that somehow tied us to the divine, and helped us to see the right ways to order ourselves and to interact with the rest of the world, which is quite different. Now, clearly, we can argue about how sustainable that was, and what happened to that. But anyway, so Robinson talks about the ways that people look at societies that are non-political, and he talks about how one way that they're looked at is they are looked at as primitive. Basically, they are they're early stages that haven't reached the proper form yet, and that sorry, I'm trying to find it here so I don't just talking. So primitive, they're outside of the they're outside of political communities. Sometimes people even talk about how that they will eventually be incorporated, but they're not seen as viable ways of understanding or looking at or wrestling with ordering of society, because they're seen as less than. The other way that some places, some societies that are non-political are looked at would be, as experiments, like a communal movement, or maybe some religious movement from the past, and so they just see them as kind of temporary, and that they only can exist because um, they're living off the grander political system inside of it. And so then he says that, the third possibility of looking at these is that they do in truth exist independent of any experience of the political, either as sufferance or embryo, through the agency of an entirely different vision of authority from that of the political. And then he says, if people found a consciousness of authority, survival, and order without respect to the political, that is, without human agencies which embody power and its cognates, then they can be understood to be authentically without politics. So and he will come back to this idea that and look at and examine a culture or two, and talk about non-political organization. But what I think is important for him here, and as we go through the book, is this idea of consciousness, of coming to consciousness, that there is a way of understanding the world and understanding the ordering of societies, or the collectivization and sustaining of a society, outside of what we understand as the political world, or the government, the governing structures the way they are now. And so I know I'm going on too long, but there's two more sections of this that just are important to get through, and he looks in turn at authority and at order, because he says that we have to that we're looking at trying to see consciousness of authority, survival, and order without respect to the political. So the question is, what are the roots? What is the ways of understanding authority and ways of understanding order? And this I think is interesting as well, is thinking about authority in different ways, and particularly coming from a religious or spiritual background, this idea of authority, because he talks about how in the Greek and Roman understanding, at least the Greek and the early Roman understanding, that he says, Greek thought identified authority variously as truth, beauty, and lastly as the highest idea, in which all other ideas must partake in order to be idea all, that fitness, and you can see here kind of the idea of rightness, and Aristotle saw authority as the natural order of things. So you have this idea in the Greek and Roman world, where authority is something like a tradition that's passed down. It's something that is kind of an ordering of the world that has functioned for the elders. So you can think of it maybe in outside of Western categories as ancestral or elder knowledge that's passed down, and that there's a certain authority given to that, to those traditional ways, um, because they have maintained the the society for for a certain amount of time. And what he will say is that basically, as the Romans came in contact, or you know uh, or had to um, exert their influence on those kind of outside of their community, or outside of their, well, basically, as they became more imperial, they had to exercise what we would term a more traditional idea of political authority, a more coercive use of power with those who were outsiders to the Rome to the Roman world. So in Rome, you could have this understanding of tradition and fitness and rightness and passing down, but out in the periphery, you needed to have a little bit stronger way of enforcing your understanding of of authority. So you have, you know, um, a little more use of military and suppression. And it is interesting in studying in and having gone to seminary and studying like this era, is that a lot of the depictions of the Caesars and their family as gods is and those kind of dedications and the worship of the Caesars as gods, and putting them in the pantheon, that happens outside of Rome. It is a propaganda tool in the in Asia and in the other places. In Rome, it's not so. That's not so accepted. There's a different way of dealing with authority, but the authority, the political authority, or the coercive authority um, happens out in the periphery. And then he says that the modern notion of political authority really comes into play with Machiavelli. Um, and so I'll read this quote here. He says, for Machiavelli, it distinguishes his thought from the early traditions. Political authority rested from its inception in the cradle of power, force, and violence. It was then a transformation of classical authority into temporal and historical forms, clawing respect not from the bequest of a true order of things, but from fear, not from a foundation and obligation drawn up in authority for eternity, but from demonstrated diffuseness. All political society is based on repressive organized force. Is Machiavelli, and what he will say is kind of the continued understanding of political order. And we can talk about this more later on, but he says power and authority are thus confused with one another. Their paradigm relates power to authority by way of political authority. And then he goes on to talk about order, and I think this is an important quote. Really is a stratagem which purports to contain the means of discovering, revealing, and articulating certain ordered insights about order. Yet it too represents some arbitrary choice of which non-ordered phenomena will be understood and acknowledged. I bring this up because later on and throughout the book, rationality and irrationality will become important terms. And again, Robinson takes issue with a certain way of using rationality or rationalizing, again, as a way to say this is rational, this is irrational. Um, Even the origins of the idea of ideology comes from the French Revolution, with kind of the elites who were worried about having their heads chopped off, start talking about ideology as a way, in a way to ground the rational, again, kind of in their understanding of the world, and to call, the ferment of the masses and the revolutionary folks as irrational, and to begin to push their ideas, out of the way. So rationality, irrationality will come back again. And then the last thing he says about order is that simply that, um, you know, part of the thing about order is that, our mind, our eyes, and our the way that our eyes and mind works is, are making order out of things. We notice certain things, and we, um, kind of seem to categorize things. There's a way that our minds are ordering in, internally, our minds order things in the world, and that we and what we've always done is seek to kind of project that out on society. And so, he basically says at the end that, it can be said that order as a presumption concerning human existence proceeds from looking at things. So, um and so he says that, that in a way that there is, in a way, order comes naturally to us, um, but it is again a question of, how do we understand the irrational? How do we understand our what is termed chaos, and what is termed, outside of the rational, outside of the ordered, and are there other ways of organizing the social world without the move toward political authority that rests on, um, violence, coercion, coercive power, and so on. Well, that got us through the whole chapter. I know that there's even parts of it that I didn't go over, very well. This is almost an hour long. I don't know if there's ways I can cut this video down and make it less, but, I hope this is helpful. Um, I know that, yeah, there's probably some more things that could be said, but, I think the main thing coming out of this chapter to think about is just the way that, even at its very roots, when thinking about how we talk about democracy, um, how we understand, authority, and the use of, um, political authority, I think it's even saying the words almost automatically take us to this understanding of power and coercive power. And again, that takes us back to, you know, this almost automatic reach for, um, the police and policing as the primary source of ordering, at home, and then, military abroad, to order the world around us, um, and that this is all, uh, in a way, what Cedric Robinson would call the political a political understanding of the world, um, that is not the only way of ordering things. And in fact, you know, it's it's a corrupted, um, understanding of the human and the social, and, it is actually because it is a faithful mechanism of response that actually um, functions well for a certain segment of the population, a certain class of folks, that it has gained traction and remains the blinders with which we are asked to go about our day-to-day lives. And he would argue, and I think I would argue too, that it might be time to seek, the consciousness to see other ways, to begin to consider other ways of being in the world. And he will go on in the next chapter to talk more about leadership in relation to this. So in the chapter called The Parameters of Leadership. So we'll see, there'll be an investigation of how leaders help to set these parameters that and these blinders with which we go about seeing the world. So anyway, again, hope this helps. If you have any questions or comments, just put them in the comments. Put it below the video, and hopefully be interested in hearing what you think. And I will see you next time, in a week or two. Not sure. All right. Thanks a lot.